Ooh, welcome back to Up in the Blue Seats, our New York Rangers podcast from the New York Post. Those highlights you heard are courtesy of ESPN. The New York Rangers, Molly, are 1-0, a rowdy Madison Square Garden. We got a busy show coming at you today. It's Jake Brown here, the queen of the Post, New York Rangers beat writer for the New York Post. Mollie Walker is there. In just a few minutes, we'll be joined by our Hall of Fame hockey writer, Larry Brooks, who is also in the building, and later on, making his record-breaking, I believe it's now 8th appearance, Molly, on the show, is Dave Maloney, one of the voices of the Rangers on ESPN Radio New York, MSG Network, of course, and former Rangers captain. What a start to the season. It was drawn up perfectly. The Lightning, revenge. Lightning ain't striking twice, Molly. A packed house, a rowdy house. Energy was there. And it was Mika night. You know, almost had hats thrown on the ice last night, and a hell of a start to the Ranger season.
Yeah, I mean, undefeated. No, I'm kidding. But it was just about as good of a start to the season that the Rangers could have possibly asked for. There's just a lot of things that went right. Just like you said, Mika Zibanejad 1 goal away from a hat trick, but he didn't even need the hat trick. He just was an absolute menace on special teams in every aspect. And, you know, that's all you could really ask from your number one center. And, you know, I think that in talking to Mika Zibanejad early on in training camp about what happened in the first round of the playoffs against Sidney Crosby, and you know how much was made of what they did to him in that series, how they took him out of it for the most part until the end, and how he really just needed to remind himself of the kind of player that he knows that he can be, and what his opponents should have to be afraid of. I mean, boy, did he give the rest of the NHL a reminder last night, and I wrote about that. I mean, just a really good start to the season for him, but obviously all he cared about was the win, as he should. And the defense was great. Special teams was great. Really, you couldn't have started the season on a higher note than that for sure. I mean, they didn't make much of the fact that it was the Lightning on the other end of the ice, and that's not something that head coach Gerard Gallant would ever do in general. So that just speaks to the Rangers mindset. And I think that's a good thing. It wouldn't have mattered who was on the other end of the ice. A win to start the season is a win to start the season.
What'd you feel about the energy last night? Did it feel like a playoff kind of atmosphere? I love when the lights are flickering on and off. You know, the Yankees did that too. They shut the lights in the building for game 1 of the playoffs last night. What did it feel like in there?
Playoff atmosphere in game 1 of 82. I don't know if I'd go that far, but it was loud. I will say it was really loud. And I mean, why wouldn't it be loud? They definitely had a lot to cheer for. It was awesome when they put the Yankees, Anthony Rizzo 2-run homer on the Jumbotron. The whole building went nuts, but not as nuts as they went when legendary goaltender Henrik Lundqvist came on the Jumbotron. So obviously he was in attendance. It was a really good night. It was a really, really good start to the season for the Rangers in all aspects, 100%.
Well, as we talk more about the Rangers, and we'll talk about Vitali Kravtsov as well, we're going to now welcome in our Rangers Hockey Hall of Fame writer, Larry Brooks. He is in the building with us now on Zoom. Good morning, Larry.
Good morning.
Vitali Kravtsov. Let's start there. Details. Day to day. What's the injury status here?
Well, it's about an hour before practice starts. So we're all day to day, are we not, Jake?
Yeah.
I don't know if there's any more information. It'll come at practice. The Rangers generally aren't liberal with the dispensing information. I don't want to guess, but it wouldn't be surprising if he misses a game or so, or maybe not. Honestly, we're just speculating here.
So this is a good transition into what you wrote about last night, Larry. Probably the one negative to come out of the Rangers season opening win, but it is completely warranted. The Rangers are already potentially down 2 forwards in Sammy Blais and Vitali Kravtsov, like we just mentioned. Just how difficult of a situation are the Blueshirts in cap-wise when it comes to the roster?
Honestly, Chris Drury is walking a tightrope here. And 7 minutes into the season illustrates exactly why. The Rangers just don't have enough space to accommodate injuries. Both literally and figuratively as you look ahead to the deadline. I mean, they went into the season with about $185,000 in cap space. So if you run in with a max roster, so if you run into injuries, they don't even have enough space now with two guys down to bring in a replacement. But that's almost secondary to the fact that every day the Rangers are not able to save cap space means that they have less space available at the deadline. It accrues. If you start with $1 million, if you start with $1 million on opening night, you basically have $4.65 million to spend at the deadline. We know things happen during the season. And the Rangers need to get to the point where they have between $5 and $6 million available at the deadline if there's any chance to get Patrick Kane. That's just the way it is. And Patrick Kane is the guy who fits perfectly into the Rangers as a rental. You know, we can discuss what they should give up, you know, how much is worth to get a rental, because that's what it would be, because we know the cap situation going forward is bad too. But the Rangers have to be in the game for Patrick Kane. And right now they're not. They're just out of it. They will have almost no space at the deadline unless they can get down to 22 right away. And 2 injuries makes it almost impossible for them to do that. You know, last year they had space. They had a lot of space last year. They also had good fortune during the season. None of their top guys, except for Kakko, missed an appreciable amount of time. And a number of the players who even missed 3 or 4 games missed it because of COVID. You know, they really had a good run. They had a great run of health last year during the season. You can't count on that to happen. We know how good their training staff is. We know, you know, but every team works hard, you know, in training and protecting their players. You know, there's luck involved in that. And, you know, right now, apparently minor injuries to Sammy Blais and probably to Kravtsov. But even minor injuries now become major in the cap situation. And I know that, you know, fans want just to read a celebratory piece about the opening night win, but, you know, there's more to it than just that. I mean, celebrate the win, but be aware that this is an issue the Rangers are going to have to face all year. And there may even be games this year where they play a man short. And, you know, you can't start the season. And many teams have. You can't start the season with, you know, a couple $100,000 in cap space. It's just too tricky.
Can I just say how much I've gotten a kick out of how much conversation there's been around the Rangers and Patrick Kane, and we are literally in game 1 of 82 of the season.
No, I know.
I just think it's hilarious. And I also thought it was hilarious how you put in your predictions with an asterisk that the Rangers would go further if they do acquire Patrick Kane at the trade deadline. And I know a lot of people got a kick out of that too.
That's true. You know, it's funny because I actually started writing about, or I brought up the Patrick Kane scenario, I think last November.
No, we've been talking about it for way too long.
Because, you know what? Because it's just such a perfect fit.
Yeah.
You know, he's a perfect fit for anybody, but, you know, let's make that clear.
Right.
But he's a perfect fit with Artemi Panarin.
Yeah.
Just this. I mean, he is, you know, as much as he and Ryan Strome, as much as Panarin and Ryan Strome were close and you know, are friends, there's never been a line mate who has been as simpatico with Panarin as Patrick Kane. And so, you know, if you're looking for a right wing plug in, you know,
he's
with
the man.
Panarin and Trocheck, it's Patrick Kane.
I will say that I was talking to Artemi Panarin just about when he first came into the league, and I was actually just asking him about how he learned English and things like that, because I was trying to compare it to Vitali Kravtsov, and he was telling me how once he got on a line with Patrick Kane, he thought to himself, you know, I want to be so good with this guy that they can't ask me to do anything, because that man absolutely hated going to his hour sessions of English classes, and he just didn't want to do it. So he thought to himself, I'm just gonna light it up with Patrick Kane so nobody can ask me to do anything. It's too good. Well, maybe we will see Artemi Panarin and Patrick Kane reunited at some point. We'll see. But moving on, the Rangers defense looked pretty good last night, and Zach Jones fit right in and made the most of his first game. But again, we're going with another negative, but you have to feel for Libor Hajek. I feel, can the Rangers really put him through another season of just sitting in the press box? What do you expect to happen when it comes to Libor Hajek?
I don't think so. I honestly, I think, and I think everyone recognizes that. I think Chris Drury recognizes that. He's a former player. Is one, Libor is a great teammate, works hard. You can't as an organization, put a player's career on hold basically for 2 years. I had actually expected before the opener, I had expected Hajek to get into one of the next 2 games, the back-to-back games. I don't know whether, Zach Jones had a very strong game last night.
He
did. And his pair with Brady Schneider was,
good.
was pretty good as a third pair. They were solid. They were up the ice.
Kravtsov goes down. He jumps on the power play, that's his spot.
Which actually, I think if Zach Jones is on the team, you use Zach Jones.
He has to be.
Now, the second power play, got very little time last night, and it's not going to get that much time during the season. Last night
they never get time, period.
Last night was a little absurd. I wasn't able to get into the breakdown, but the first power play was on like for a minute 49, a minute 38. But the point is, I'm sure the second power play unit will be integrated, more as games go on. And one of Zach Jones' greatest attributes is the ability to run the power play. That's his forte. So if you have Zach Jones on the team, I think he should be on the power play. Kravtsov.
I agree.
But getting back to Hajek, I had expected Hajek to get into one of these next 2 games, because I think that there is an awareness from management. There's an awareness from the coaching staff that they're not going to be able to keep, Libor as
just unfair,
to play him in 15, 20 games.
Yeah.
The other issue is, again, we talk about depth. The Rangers don't have much organizational depth now on D. I don't think Matt Robertson had the training camp anyone was hoping for. Listen, he's a very young player. Not everyone develops as quickly as K'Andre Miller, as quickly as Braden Schneider, as quickly as Adam Fox, even, although Fox was a little bit older. So it's not that, Matthew Robertson is a disappointment, but I think he was expected to compete, for that job, and he really didn't, maybe because Jones and Hajek are just better players and more experienced players. But the Rangers really can't give Hajek away either, because one injury there and who's playing.
Yep.
Even Jared Tenorti, who, is a reasonable 8. I don't think you'd want Jared Tenorti to play, 30 games for you. But
not that it matters anymore.
Right. But
Jared in Chicago
could play, if it were an emergency, Jared Tenorti could come up and play 5 or 6 games, I guess. But he was claimed on waivers. And so they don't even have that as a safety net. So again, the Rangers look like they are a solid unit, but there's not much behind it right now. And the cap situation plays into it. So I expect them to be fair with Libor, but he may sit for a little bit. And then again, Drury's in a tough spot. Very tough spot, because you have to have a 7th D who can come and play. So I'm not sure.
On a little bit more of a positive note, you also had a pretty interesting conversation with Chris Kreider the other day that you were telling me about. Obviously, he's the longest tenured guy on the team. He's a huge part of it, named Mr. Ranger. And you briefly touched on Jacob Trouba getting named captain with a guy that a lot of the fan base thought it should be. So how did that convo go?
Oh, it was, Chris, I always enjoy talking to Chris. He's an intelligent, perceptive person who expresses himself very well. And we were talking about the season, and we were talking about his year. And this was a year where he won the Mr. Ranger Award. He is the senior member of the team. a large portion of the fan base has believed he should be captain for years. But you look at the number of times, he was, the opportunities they had to name him captain, the years where they went without one, and they didn't. And then obviously Trouba. So I asked him, I asked him if, that had ever really been a goal of his, to be captain of the Rangers when he joined the team. Did he ever think, oh, I want to be captain of this team? And, now apparently, it's kind of fine. It's been finalized that he won't be captain of the team.
Yeah.
So I asked him if he might ever look back and think of that as a hole in his resume. And he immediately said, he recoiled actually from the suggestion and said, no. He said, first, of course, he reiterated his support for Trouba, which is sincere. But then he said the hole in his resume is not winning the Stanley Cup. And he said that's what he's aiming to rectify this season. And I believe that. I truly believe that. I think that Chris has been in the league now for 10 years. He's gone through a metamorphosis. He's gone through a growth. And he talked about that. He and I talked about that last year in our one-on-one phone conversation.
The elusive 101s last year.
He's as I think now he is as comfortable in his own skin and being Chris Kreider as any player in the league is comfortable being himself. So I think that anyone would be honored by being captain of the Rangers. I think Chris would have been honored, but I think he's at a different, he's arrived at a different plane where he is almost Zen-like, in a number of ways. And so it was an interesting conversation. It was also interesting when I asked him, did he ever, had he thought about needing to repeat 52? Can he get to 50 again? Is that, has that been on his mind? And it was impossible to get him to talk about 50 last year. It was impossible. Even I remember the night he got his 50th.
Yeah.
He came into the room and there were like 3 or 4 questions and no one was asking him. And I remember saying, Chris, 50. And he basically said, well, I have good teammates, something like that.
Yeah.
So I asked him about 50 and he started, going, if he could repeat. And he started talking about his season and his approach in a way I've never heard before. He started talking about, he said, I play Moneyball. And I thought, what? And I was writing it down.
Yeah, Moneyball. Yeah.
Maybe I didn't hear that correctly. But he came back to me, he said, I'm playing Moneyball. And what he meant was, and he said, he plays the percentages. He said, if I can get to the front a certain percentage of time, if I can get my stick down a certain percentage of time, and I do the right thing, I'm playing with such great passers that a certain percentage of the time they will be able to get the puck to me. And so a certain percentage of the time the puck will go in. It was just fascinating, but that's the way he now breaks it down. And, I was watching him last night, in my little isolated, and I could see him, you could see, right. Well, he's there now. If Foxy can get the puck through,
he can get a stick on it.
He's a fascinating player to talk to on the Rangers.
I was enjoying that Hall of Famer and future Hall of Famer conversation going on there. I want to ask a big picture question every week, Larry. Looking back in your career, you talk about how easy it is to cover Chris Kreider. Who is the most difficult Ranger player you've ever had to cover? I'm sure there's a long list, but pick
I was
one.
gonna say, I think there is a long list. I've certainly heard of the long list.
Well, there are players. I've gotten along with most players, honestly. I've had really good relationships with a number of players. I've had, professional relationships with most players. There have been a few players I just haven't hit it off with, and Dan Boyle and I just never hit it off.
Yeah.
Honestly,
I had a feeling.
Never hit it off. Not to revisit, the past, but but Dan Boyle and I just never hit it off, and it was apparent from the first day. It was, there was something about me that he didn't like, and there was something about him that I didn't appreciate, and and so honestly, for 2 years we just, we didn't speak very much. When we did, it was not pleasant for either one of us. And so I would have to say that he was probably the toughest. And what was interesting about it is that when he was in Tampa, and somewhat in Dallas too, when he was in Tampa, he was one of the best players I'd ever seen. I mean, one of the best defensemen I'd ever seen. I mean, he would rush the puck. He was Tampa's version of not quite as good in the defensive zone, but he was, Tampa's version of, Brian Leach or Scott Niedermayer. He's not, not on that level, but he was on a Hall of Fame track in Tampa. And I can't count the number of times I wrote, the Rangers should get Dan Boyle. The Rangers should get Dan Boyle. And when Tampa forced him to waive his no trade clause or no move clause, whichever it was, they actually pulled the same thing on Boyle as they did on McDonough, where they said, hey, you've got a no trade, but if you don't waive it, we're going to put you on waivers and you're going to wind up going to a team you don't want to play on. And so he went to Dallas. But I remember writing, because at that time I was close to his agent also. And I remember writing, if Tampa's forcing Dan Boyle out, he should only, say he wants to come to the Rangers. And, for me, it was a case of, be careful what you wish for.
Yeah.
So clearly you didn't read those.
Just didn't work. The chemistry just didn't work.
All right, Molly, you're off to Minnesota and Winnipeg. Are you going to both, or are you just going to Minnesota, Molly?
Both.
Larry, any recommendations for the young Molly, what to do in Minnesota and Winnipeg?
Stay warm.
Young Molly has a different set of priorities at this point in her life than so. I think young Molly might be able to tell me where to go in these cities.
I appreciate that.
She'll do fine. She's doing
fine. We have a good time
without my advice.
we have a good time. The Minnesota's fun because it's the St. Paul Hotel. It's like one of the most iconic places to stay there, and it's very old timey, and it's good vibes all around. So I always look forward to going to Minnesota. And it's
recommended by Larry.
Recommended by Larry. I always ask Larry what hotels I should stay in.
What does she eat? What's the dinner spot? Because all I know is Mall of America and now the hotel. What else?
Well, there's a restaurant in the hotel actually that's really good. Yeah, we went to it pregame last season, Vince, Colin, and I, and we had steak. We had a steak dinner before the game, which really, what more could you ask for? No,
the St. Paul Hotel has a great steakhouse. The bar is one of the great bars actually in the country. And I am not an aficionado of Scotch, and I don't really drink hard liquor. But I know that people who do, point to the
Colin likes it.
Yeah.
Colin, when I first started going on the road with Colin told me he was experimenting with brown liquids. The way that he phrased
that can mean
it.
So many things that I don't even want to go down that path.
I know, that's the way he phrased it. And I remember being like, oh, okay.
I see like Larry, you're a wine guy, I feel like.
Well, yeah, wine.
He's a martini guy, is what he is. Yeah.
Classic. That's how Hall of Famers do it. A little glass, little martini. I like it. No Scotch in this household. NYP_Brooksie is where you follow him on Twitter. Read his stories in the New York Post and at nypost.com. Larry, we'll talk to you next week.
Sounds good. Thanks. Safe trip, Molly.
Thanks.
All righty. Joining us now on Up in the Blue Seats is a good friend of the program, now making his Guinness Book World Record 8th appearance. Since we launched Up in the Blue Seats in the fall of 2019, he's a former Ranger captain, spending 11 seasons with the Blueshirts from 74 to 85. You can now catch him, of course, on 98.7 ESPN radio, calling these Ranger games, as well as MSG Network this season. He's at home. He's on the road. He's back in the saddle. Let's welcome back the only Rangers player ever, and I can't confirm this, to also work at a wine shop in Connecticut. Just going to guess that you're the only one. Dave Maloney, welcome back to the show, Dave. How you doing?
Well, very well, Jake. And Molly, it's always great to see you. Don't see Molly regularly, which is a good thing. And so it's all good. Got up to a rip-roaring start last night. Boy, was that building electric or what?
Wasn't it, right?
Oh,
we were
man.
talking about that earlier. It was loud. It was really loud. I mean, well, why wouldn't it be? There was so much to cheer for.
Yeah, exactly. Well, you go back a year ago, and I really thought that over the course of the season, you really got the vibe that people were happy just to be out.
Cool. Oh, of course.
And after the dealing with the pandemic, and then I do give kudos to the Rangers in-house entertainment staff. They've done a tremendous job of engaging from not even puck drop, prior to puck drop to the end. And, whether it's the karaoke cam or some other goofy thing they've got going, but the crowd seems to buy into it. It's just, it really has become an electric building, and the team style is pretty good too.
I was gonna say, are you a big fan of the DJ performances in between periods? Are you
Dave's
are you
pumping his fist in the
booth?
booth.
Yeah. You're giving the old no. My children would cringe if they were sounding good and stuff like that. So no, but it's all fun. It's just a great, and it really does start with their style of play. I mean, their style of play is entertaining, it's engaging, and it really is. A lot of times you say, they talk about the world's most famous arena, and I do know, being down at sidelines for some of the sideline work that I do, that every team that comes in there is fired up to play at the Garden. So, and the Rangers is a pretty good team now, so it's awesome.
Yeah, well, let's get into it with you, Dave. I guess it would be inappropriate to start anywhere else but with the newly named captain, Jacob Trouba. As a former captain yourself, what have you noticed about Jacob Trouba that you think will make him a good captain?
You know what, Molly, it was last year, again, we didn't have access to the players that we traditionally would have had prior to COVID. So you can only kind of surmise by what you hear and talking to people, but it sure looked like, I thought he and Kreider both became much, much more comfortable in their skin, much more comfortable in who they are. And they were assuming the mantle of veteran players. And it sure sounded like when Jacob stood up to be heard, he was heard. And I also think too, the franchise has gone through 4 or 5 years of a rebuild or remodel or whatever you want to call it. And it does take time for chemistry to evolve in a room. And I think in any group, there are people that kind of take the lead, either vocally loud or quietly observing. And I think it's important. I think it's important that there is a hierarchy. And I know I texted him when he was named captain, and I congratulated him. And I did think that they got the right guy. So, and as far as the role of captain, it certainly has evolved. I think Mark Messier just took it to another level as far as what it meant for this franchise to be a captain. But I was surprised there's only 28 in the history of the franchise.
Yeah.
And, that surprised me.
It's an exclusive group.
Yeah, really. So all in all, I think, and then you know what? He had a tremendous year last year.
Very.
And I do know you're a lot better captain, the better player you are. And if your game can match up to the things that you perform off ice. So, boy, what a start. I think it was 5 or 6 shots on goal, 25 minutes of ice time, 2 or 4 big hits, and just a commanding presence.
I feel like you're speaking from experience there. What was the toughest part about being captain for you?
Well, it's about 1,000 years ago that happened for me. So I think I wasn't quite mature enough yet to take it beyond the emotion of who I was. And I would bark probably louder and bite louder than probably called for. And it was all fine and dandy the year we went to the finals my first year, and we had a fairly solid veteran group, like they do now. I was privy to guys like John Davidson and Phil and Walter Tkachuk and Carol Vadnais, God rest his soul. And so I think the hardest part moving forward was just managing my own emotions in a more positive way, where it wasn't quite so critical. And but I was only 21, 22, and Jacob's 27, 28.
Yeah.
He's a 10-year veteran of the league now.
Yeah.
And it's a role that's traditionally been important. I think it's still important, but I do think experience is good. I believe I just wasn't quite experienced enough to handle the overall picture. But it was sure fun being one of the 28, and I'll milk that thing.
Yeah. That's I just can't picture you being quick to bite and quick to bark. It just doesn't seem like you, Dave, but I'll take your word for it.
Yeah, well, I was wound a little tight in those days.
Yeah.
Anyway,
naturally, it's
good.
all right. Shifting kind of to the team narrative, I guess this
Right.
season, you went all the way to the Cup in your third season in
Right.
78, 79. What can you remember about the expectations that hovered over the team after that, and how it affected you, if at all? Because this Rangers team is obviously facing the type of expectations that they haven't in so long. And I feel like it went from 0 to 100 real quick. Like it went from, last season, it was just kind of like the ultimate goal was just to qualify for the playoffs. And now it's building upon last season's run, which the only way to go is up from the Eastern Conference Final is the Stanley Cup Final. So it's pretty lofty expectations. So what is it like when that kind of expectations are hovering over the team? Did you notice it?
Well, you know what, Molly, it's interesting to hear you speak and thinking back. The one thing, although there's probably a 20 to 25% roster turnover now, generally. Then you lose Strome, you lose Kopp, you lose Vetrano. But that season, we lost 4 guys. The World Hockey was coming into existence. We lost 4 guys in the dispersal draft. And then early in the season, they made the big trade for Barry Beck. And that took 3 other guys off our roster. So that was 7 guys that participated in a run that was not so much unlike last season's run, so totally unexpected. We beat the Islanders. So, of course, you can't help but expect good things when you're coming off of good things. But I think the difference for these two, if we compare the 2 stories, the core of the group, John Davidson got hurt. He wasn't quite the same goalie. Now you're coming back with Shesterkin. There were an awful lot of good reasons to think that this team was going to have a chance to kind of build on the expectations. But when you have success, you can't help but think that you're going to be better. And I think that's the biggest difference of the 2 teams going back, and Chris Drury, Freddie Shero and Mickey Keating were a year into their management positions. Freddie had a couple of issues that would debilitate his presence around, but the manager is strong here. There was just so many things stayed in place. You got to move Kako, you got to move this, you got to move somebody to create room. And I give Drury and his staff credit. They did have to fill some holes. But by and large, when you look at the pieces that were there, you start with the best goaltender in the league. And the captain now has come into his own. But a guy we'd never talk about is Adam Fox, 2 years removed from the Norris. And Mika Zibanejad all of a sudden is now maybe in the top 5, for sure, top 10 center ice in the league, and Kreider. So there are a lot of reasons to be expectant with this group. I think the consistency of the personnel would be the major difference between our team in 79 and this group heading forward.
Zeroing on defense a little bit, through the exhibition games and the opener, who do you feel like has stood out to you on the back end, and why?
Keandre.
Yeah, me too.
Well, which is not, I don't want this to be specific gender related, but there were 2 MSG sales women at our golf outing. That had an opportunity to speak to Keandre up close and personal, and they swooned the guy in the back end. Now, as far as his play, I had thought, first of all, his evolution as a young defenseman has been spectacular. And, when you think of all the picks that they've had between 17 and up to Lafreniere, and Offman looks like he's going to be a player too.
100%.
you hope you get a one horse out of the deal,
Mhm.
you know, and 2 or 3 other guys that can play. And I remember thinking and observing last year that horse might be Miller.
Mhm.
He's going to play big minutes.
Yep.
He's a wonderful skater.
Yeah.
He's become that much more confident in all elements of the game. And I just think that, you know, the upside for him, the deal that they're going to have to figure out is how to pay him moving forward,
That's
which is really not a bad thing.
yeah.
He's got wonderful feet. He's learning with a good group of defenders. I just think that on the back end, you know, Fox is going to be Fox. Watch him last night. When you watch him, you think, well, but when you really watch him, he does so many
Yeah.
things. So
It's crazy.
subtle. And hold on a sec. Nobody ever calls me. I'm not sure what that is. Probably Joseph.
Let's put him on the show. Anyone important?
Yeah. So I just think that he continues to impress.
Yeah. I completely agree. I think he looks a year older. He's
Mhm.
playing like he's a year older and with experience now. You know, he told me that the game just really slowed down a lot for
Mhm.
him from year 1 to year 2, and the reach that he has on him. How lethal can that be in
Yeah.
this league?
Well, you know what, too, Molly, is he gives himself a chance to use his reach in a more effective way by getting where he's supposed to be. You know, a lot of guys will be a half a stride late and try and use that reach. But what Keandre does is he gets there. He's like Lindgren. Lindgren gets there, and then he makes the defensive move. He's not cheating by not getting there. And I like especially some young kids. I watched the Brunswick School. They had a couple of big, long defensemen. And, you know, you should watch Keandre Miller.
Mhm.
Just watch how he gets there. And then that reach becomes that more effective because he gets there. It just, you know what, he's just the upside for him. And when you consider really at 14 and 15, he had took the year off basically to work on his skating. And
Mhm.
it's too easy to think that it's all athleticism, but he's very athletic and smart, uses his assets very, very well. I'm just really excited to be able to watch him going down the road.
They
You know,
they vote for world's sexiest man. Is he on the cover of the Rangers yearbooks as the Rangers sexiest man, Dave?
Yeah, you know, in this day and age, I can even admit that I kind of swoon when I watch him. You know. But I will say that's hockey related. So, but all in all, no, he's again, he's very representative of a very talented young group, and I wouldn't be surprised if he is the one guy. Although Kakko's making strides, Heedle's making strides. Lafreniere just turned 21. He's not a man yet. They've got a lot of good stuff going on.
I would agree.
So
Laffy is celebrating at 21 with his first legal drinks last night, I would assume. Maybe he had late to practice this morning, rightfully so. Who knows?
Yeah.
Dave, you're on the road now. Is the wine is it goodbye to the wine shop now?
No, my hours are a little bit different. I do still get a kick out of going in there. I'm usually in there on Tuesdays and Wednesdays, but yesterday was game day and today was travel game. So I still get a kick out of it, though. It's an awful lot of fun going
The
in.
world's hardest working man, from the wine shop to the garden. That's going to be a Netflix special in the making, Dave Maloney.
Yeah, really lucky. It's, you know, I don't consider what I do work in this business of following a team around and flying and traveling the way we do. And I get the best seat in the house right behind Molly and garden. And it's just a terrific life. And I'm just happy to be. There's still times I walk around and go, gosh, I can't believe I'm still here. And I'm still here.
Well, you do a great job. And I imagine, like Molly and Larry have said, you're enjoying being back in the locker room, the access, you're on the flight with these guys. You're kind of get to know these guys on a personal level beyond a Zoom screen, which has got to be, you know, it adds value to your job. You could break things down better. You could be more the expert that you are, right?
Yeah. The big thing, Jake, is just getting to know them. Like the X's and O's are, you know, they're pretty common, especially the, you know, hockey guys. There's not that many different things. I often think about the clip they run with Emile Francis in the locker room again. They're playing Chicago, and it's in the early '60s. And he's talking about, you know, being hard on the puck, take the man, move the puck. You know, it's really, you know, I don't know, 50 years, 60 some odd years later, we basically talk about the same thing. So, but really, it's just getting comfortable and having them be comfortable too, with guys like myself and Joe and Sam and Molly and the people that, so you're just not that kind of loudmouth that's talking about things without really getting to know somebody. And so that's fun. I enjoy that. I really do enjoy just getting to know the guys a little bit better.
You can watch and listen to Dave Maloney on MSG Network on 98.7 FM, ESPN Radio New York, all season long. Follow him on Twitter at Dave Maloney MSG. Dave, looking forward to checking back in with you. We got to get you to double digits. So you got appearance 9 and appearance 10, and then maybe we'll get to a dozen just for the sake of a dozen donuts, and then we'll close it off there. But Dave Maloney, thanks for coming on up in the blue seats. Talk to you soon.
Well, thanks, Jake, and Molly. Thank you. Both of you keep up the good work.